The Unicorn Trap: Why $1 billion valuations became a death sentence. In 2023, over 1,400 unicorn startups were operating globally, companies valued at $1 billion or more. Today, fewer than half are still independent. They didn't fail because they were bad ideas. They failed because they became something else entirely. This is the story of what a unicorn valuation actually means, and why getting it might be the worst thing that could happen to your company. Let's start with the definition. A unicorn is a private startup company valued at over $1 billion. That's not revenue. That's not profit. That's investor perception of what the company might be worth someday. The term itself was coined in 2013 by venture capitalist Aileen Lee, who observed that reaching this valuation was so rare it seemed mythical. She was right about it being rare. She was wrong about what it meant. The problem started in 2010 when venture capital funding began its vertical climb. Before then, getting $100 million in venture funding was genuinely difficult. By 2015, that was just seed money. By 2021, venture firms were sitting on so much capital that they had to deploy it somewhere. They couldn't wait for companies to prove profitability. Speed became the only metric that mattered. Here's how it works. An investor values a company at $1 billion. Not because the math works. Because the company is growing 100% year over year and the investor believes that curve continues forever. That's a specific bet. That growth will never slow down. Once you take that valuation, you're locked in. Your employees get stock options priced at that $1 billion number. Your board expects you to hit $10 billion next. Your runway shrinks because your burn rate is now astronomical. You're spending like $1 billion company while generating revenue like a $100 million company. Then came 2022. Interest rates went up. The venture funding spigot closed. And suddenly, 1,400 companies woke up to the same nightmare. They were valued at $1 billion but worth nothing like that without continuous growth and continuous funding. The specifics matter here. In 2022, venture capital funding dropped from $238 billion in 2021 to $63.9 billion. That's a 73% collapse in 1 year. Not a correction. A collapse. Companies like WeWork, Quibi, and Theranos had already shown the pattern, but the scale in 2022 was industrial. Hundreds of unicorns laid off 30 to 50% of staff simultaneously because they had been spending money as if funding would never end. But there was something nobody saw coming. The layoff cascade would expose the actual unit economics. When you cut staff, the companies that had hidden their losses in sheer headcount suddenly became transparent. Stripe, valued at $95 billion at its peak in 2021, laid off 14% of staff in 2022 and quietly told employees the valuation was speculative. Klarna, the buy now pay later unicorn, did 2 rounds of layoffs totaling 40% of staff. Not because the product was failing. Because the business model never worked at any scale. The real lesson isn't that unicorns failed. It's that the unicorn metric was always measuring the wrong thing. A $1 billion valuation tells you about investor sentiment in a specific moment. It tells you nothing about whether the company can actually survive without constant new funding. It tells you nothing about unit economics, whether each customer generates more revenue than you spend acquiring them. The companies that survived 2022 to 2023 weren't the ones with the highest valuations. They were the ones with the lowest burn rates. Figma kept its headcount lean. Stripe had already proven path to profitability. These weren't the sexiest stories. They weren't the ones that attracted hype. But they're the ones still independent. The mistake was treating valuation as validation instead of what it actually was, a prediction market betting on unlimited capital. Once that bet broke, the 1,400 unicorns had to face reality simultaneously. Most couldn't. Here's the concrete takeaway. If you're building a company, a high valuation is not success. It's a deadline. It's an obligation to prove that the investor's bet was right. The real test is whether your business generates more value than it consumes. Everything else is noise. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to Tech Postmortem. We break down one tech story like this every week.